At some point or another in your life, you've probably tried to learn something. Maybe it was piano, or something cool like trying to take down an opponent in wrestling, or maybe just something absolutely insane, like trying to beat the Minecraft speedrun record and become the world champion. But if you've ever tried to get really good at a particular skill, you know just how hard it can get. For some reason, whenever we try growing our skill sets and acquiring a new talent, life makes it incredibly difficult for us to do so. And up until recently, this was a huge problem for me. When I first started out learning in the field of AI, I had basically no clue what I was doing. And yes, I'm a high schooler and you need like advanced calculus to truly dive deep into the field, but I was struggling more than others because I had no approach. I basically had no clue what to learn, how to learn it, or where to even start. My logic when starting out, and I'm sure the logic of many others, was basically I'm gonna sit down and bash my head against this problem for hours and hours until I figure it out. And while that kind of brute force approach does work for some things, learning is not one of them. Learning is something that needs to be done in a strategic manner rather than something that's done expediently and without a plan. So I sat myself down and asked myself, why couldn't I learn this concept? Why was it that other people seemed to go further and learn quicker than I could? Why was it so damn hard to learn anything new? And after digging around on the internet and doing some research, what I found was that learning itself isn't actually the hard part. Anyone can learn, but the problem is learning the right things and learning enough of those things to actually acquire the skill. This forms the basis for a little something called the Dreyfus model of skill acquisition, and trust me, it sounds really intimidating, but it's actually a lot simpler than it might let on. Basically, this model breaks down expertise into 5 key buckets, on the sort of spectrum between someone who is insanely talented and someone who is not so much or just starting out. A novice is on the latter end of the spectrum. They're someone who needs strict rules to follow to get much of anything done, someone who considers all information when bombarded with a new problem instead of just focusing on a couple things, and are kind of like detached observers in their field. They see what's going on like, hey, someone published a new paper, or this team's doing something really cool, but they don't actually give back or contribute to their field in any meaningful way. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have the expert. Someone who actually provides value to their field. These people are so experienced that they can make good decisions based off of intuition alone. They know what to focus on and how, and ultimately, they help advance not just themselves, but the field as well. These are like the senior engineers of the world, who, with one quick glance at your code, can tell you exactly what you did wrong and why. And between these two categories are a bunch of other ones with people split across them. Now, looking at this, you might think, hey, won't most people fall in the middle? And that makes sense, because, that's how a normal distribution works. But here's the thing. In our case, this distribution is actually skewed a little bit towards the right. Learning new things is so hard that for any given skill, most people fall into the advanced beginner category, where you don't know enough to be classified as competent or proficient, but you don't know so little that you can be called a novice either. This is the spot where I found myself in a year ago when I actually tried to brute force my way through AI. Luckily, I've learned a trick or two since then, so here are 5 tips that I wish I knew when trying to learn a new skill, and hopefully, you'll be able to learn anything you want to in half the time. Let's get to it. The first tip is that you don't need to be an expert. I feel like a lot of us have this intrinsic idea that, to be successful at anything, you need to be an expert. But honestly, that's just not true. For most people, you don't need to be the very best of the best in order to get where you want to be. You just need to be good enough to provide value. And it's this mindset shift that really helped me accelerate my progress. Rather than trying to read every research paper in existence or learn the inner workings of AI, I shifted my focus to my end goal, which was working at an AI company. And to achieve that goal, I didn't need to be an expert. I just needed to be competent or proficient, a master of the basics, if you will. It's far better if you master being competent rather than fail at being an expert. Ultimately, you want to make sure that you have an intention behind learning what you're learning rather than just shooting in the dark and hoping that something lands. Understand what you're aiming towards, what level of skill you need to be at to get there, and then move towards that level. Tip number 2 is to decompose. Once you've set a goal and know why you're learning, now you need to sit down, take that skill or concept, and break it down into its core components. If you try learning everything at once, you'll just get overwhelmed, and honestly, that's not a good long-term strategy. Even our eyes only give the most resolution, the highest resolution, to the thing that's in front of us, the thing that's more important, and blur out everything else that's unimportant and unnecessary. And when I started off with machine learning, this is exactly what I didn't do. I basically just sat down, tried to find random bits of tutorials on the internet on YouTube, and instead of helping me, all that did was give me a bunch of irrelevant information that I didn't really need. So instead, I decided to break machine learning down into its core subcomponents, which helped me drastically reduce the time I was spending actually learning. And armed with that list of subcomponents, I then was able to devote 1 to 2 weeks to learning each one. That way, I was hitting all of the important parts of the field and growing my competence, but also not overwhelming myself. Tip number 3 is to focus on what matters. Decomposing is cool and all, but the thing is that you still need to prioritize. Not everything in that breakdown is going to be of equal importance, and you want to make sure that you're spending your time, which is a valuable resource, on the things that will be important to your goal specifically. A lot of you may have heard of Paretos Principle. Basically, that 80% of the results stem from 20% of the output. Similarly, for any given skill or concept, 20% of those subtopics are what give you 80% of the results from having learned that thing in the first place. So you want to spend your time on the things that matter the most, and then only do you want to leave time for the extra add-ons. Because you'll always be able to add the add-ons on, but honestly, learning the basics is probably the best way to go in terms of return on investment. Because that's really what we're trying to do here. Get the most value for your time. Tip number 4 is to balance action and consumption. Now, don't get me wrong here. YouTube and Coursera are fantastic sources of information, especially when you're just starting out. You don't really know what you don't know, so you need some way of getting a high-level overview or a bird's-eye view of the field and its various topics before you actually dive deep and learn them. But there's a clear dichotomy here. Humans have evolved to learn by doing. This essentially means that whenever you do something or perform an action, that creates a much stronger memory as opposed to simply sitting down and watching a random YouTube video. Yes, you need both in order to learn something effectively, but if you want to learn fast, and more importantly, if you want to learn well, then I would recommend leaning towards doing. That way, not only do you have a bunch of sick projects to show off, but you also become competent at executing in the real world as opposed to in this hypothetical bubble of theory. And honestly, I think even Albert Einstein agrees with this statement. He has a quote that goes something along the lines of, "There's no difference between theory and practice in theory, but in practice there is." And the final tip on this list is to reach out. Now, with the advent of the internet, it is easier than ever to talk to people. But at the same time, it's probably a little bit too easy given that social media is like the #1 distractor of all time. But rather than letting it be a nuisance, use it. Leverage it. There are a lot of people who severely underestimate the importance of a good, strong network. If you aren't the expert yourself, reach out to a couple. See what they're up to. Set up a couple of one-on-ones and chats with them. The more you surround yourself with people who know what they're doing, the more you'll start to develop that same mentality and that same sense of confidence. You want to see how people more skilled than you approach and solve the same problems that you do. What do they do when X happens? How do they look for different problems? And how do they reiterate on the solutions? How do they deploy them? You can only learn so much on the internet, and if you want real-world experience, reach out, expand, and grow your network. Because at the end of the day, experience is what fuels growth. Learning things is hard as hell. I won't pretend that it isn't. But if we can fix our approach, if we can take responsibility for what we're trying to learn and then go attack it, we might just find that we were more competent than we thought we were. Hello! Hope you guys really liked that one. Now, if you don't know me, my name is Aditya Dewan, and I'm a 15-year-old who's currently working in the field of artificial intelligence. On this channel, I go into more self-improvement content like this video, and I also have more tech-based project tutorials like some of the other ones you'll find. I also have a podcast. So if you guys are really into psychology, philosophy, and just cool tech stuff, I definitely think it'll be your cup of tea. We have amazing guests and come up with pretty cool insights. I think our last podcast was like a rant on the future of humanity for 1 hour and 13 minutes, which is just amazing. Yeah, so if you guys like what you see, definitely consider liking and subscribing. And yeah, have a great day. See you guys.